All right, hello Honors 100. So for today's class, we're going to be reverting back to a little bit more of our kind of conventional format for the video lectures in this class. So I'm taking a step away from the workshop process. I'm focusing instead on more specifically a text that was assigned for you to read today. So this was the Nutritionism Defined reading by Michael Pollan. So I wanted to start out asking you just sort of an open-ended question related to the content of the reading, which is about your relationship with food. And I know that this can be a potentially personal question depending on struggles you may have had related to the subject in the past. So please don't feel pressured to share anything more personal than you're comfortable sharing. But I think it can be an interesting thing just to kind of ponder, what is your relationship to food? Do you have much of a relationship to food? What do you consider when you decide what to eat? Do you consider things? Or is it more you just kind of eat whatever's in front of you or whatever your family makes for you? I know some of you are living at home. Some of you will be living on your own at this point. Some may be eating from the dining hall on campus. There's kind of a spectrum along those lines. But what's your relationship with food? How do you approach your diet? What have you heard? What do you kind of believe? I think it's sort of an interesting thing just to consider kind of our starting points for this discussion among each other. To get into the reading itself, though, so on page 490, there's this part, it's the end of the first paragraph there, where Pollan references, proper names have a way of making visible what we don't easily see or simply take for granted. And so this idea of the value of proper names, I'm curious what people think of this. Do you agree with this point? And have you seen this in other kind of parts of your life, right? Where naming something kind of affects how you look at it or has drawn your attention to something in a way that maybe you didn't think about it previously. Carrying on, right after that, the second paragraph of this reading, it says, the first thing to understand about nutritionism is that it is not the same thing as nutrition. As the ism suggests, it is not a scientific subject, but an ideology. And so I want to ask about this concept of ideologies. Some of the answer to this question goes on in that very same paragraph. You just want to refer back to the text. But I think some of you might have some answers on this just based on kind of your own life experience up to this point as well. But how do we define ideologies? Why do we have them? What's the value of them? What's maybe the dangers that go along with certain ideologies? What do we think about all of this? So on page 495, I'm not going to read a specific passage in this case, but Pollan cites some problems with studying individual nutrients and kind of what they do to people, which ones are good for us to consume, which ones are not good for us to consume. And I want to kind of review and kind of get a sense of what you took from the reading. What is the problem with considering individual nutrients on their own? And then related to that, going on to 499, at the very end of 499, it introduces this term confounders. And I'm curious of what we think of this idea of confounders. What does that even mean? What sense did you make of that from the reading? And how does that sort of speak to this topic of nutritionism? And again, how people might overall approach their diets and kind of related to things beyond their diets, such as their lifestyles. And then I think, to me, one of the more interesting questions to walk away from this reading with is just sort of pondering this point of what do we ultimately take away from a reading like this? What do we think? Because I think one way of interpreting this text is that there actually are not any right answers, right? Because Pollan is kind of poking holes in and kind of pointing out some fallacies and limitations of this idea of nutritionism and kind of the way that we've approached even the scientific study of nutrition up to this point, right? This article is a little bit dated here, but I'm curious, what are the takeaways? What should we do? Or what do we think coming out of this that you either on an individual level that you might consider, changing or keeping up, or alternatively, more broadly for kind of our culture, our society, what should people do with this information and these insights? What would we want to do? And as one last point I'll throw in for the discussion thread below, I wanted to pose kind of an imaginary exercise here. So for most of you at this point, you're working on your research argument essays. Some of you are still in the process of the initial research integration process, but you're looking ahead to that process of writing a thesis-driven essay around the original artifact and some of its themes, or maybe more focused on the research you've done up to this point. So for this exercise, imagining that this reading, what was kind of the core thing you were working with as a research source, as an artifact, what sort of thesis might you make coming out of this? And this could be directly in support of what Pollen's talking about here, and kind of what are your takeaways and what does this lead you to? In contrast, it could also be a consideration of what do you think kind of in disagreement with this, right? If there are parts of this that do not add up to you, or you feel like we know better now based on what we know about nutrition, what would you kind of guide us to as an argument that you might have, almost arguing against this reading? And there's obviously a lot of space in between those extremes. But okay, I know it's a relatively short video lecture, but I'm sure people won't mind that. So I'll leave you with that, with our discussion focused on diet and food, and more specifically the Pollen reading. I'll look forward to what y'all have to say.